This video was made possible because of Sunlu. This is Groundeffected. My name is your dad, and welcome to a bag of soggy crisps. In this video, I'm going to show you how I painted the Hulk from 3D Wicked. There will be a link in the description for their Patreon, and they also have a Gumroad and all the rest of the things. Just look in the description if you're looking for the files for the model in this video. And as I said, this video was made possible because of Sunlu. I spoke to Sunlu and told them that I had plans to make the entire Avengers series from 3D Wicked, and this video is the start of the rest of that series. Previously, I had made Iron Man. You can watch that video up here. Is it here? Before we get into the video, make sure to leave a like and a subscription would be wonderful. Bell notification, Uncle Algie, thank you. Let's watch a video now. So this was a really large statue, and I actually needed to make some pretty big drain holes in his feet so that I could print him without any suction and destroying my prints. To cover those up, I'm going to use a little trick that I've learned over the time that I've been doing this printing thing, and that is to fill it up first with a little bit of blue tack, which is pink in my case, and then to put a little bit of resin over the top and cure that with UV. Once it's cured, you can sand it smooth and it should be pretty much good to go. Now there was quite a few gaps in this model, only because it is really a large model and it's difficult to print something like this without there being some slight amount of warpage around the areas of the supports, and honestly it's probably due to not spending enough time to making sure that the fit is good. So I filled these gaps with resin and cured that and moved on to priming everything. For the symbol, I painted that with a white layer first, but as you can see it needs a couple layers to make sure it is actually truly white. I then used a mixture of these two green and yellow inks so that I could spray that over the top, leaving a slight gradient so it was lighter at the top and more green at the bottom. I sprayed a clear gloss varnish over the top of that and called that emblem on the base done. Now it's time to add the undercoat for the Hulk. To make the colors of Hulk, I need to make sure that it is fully saturated. So I'm going to spray blue ink over the black prime layer that I had put down. This will turn that blue almost purple in color. Purple is a really good color for shadows. It was time to spray a green over the top, and I'm going to start with one of the darkest, lightest greens that I have. I would call this the color of leaf midsummer. This I'm going to spray straight over the top of the model. This doesn't need to be a dark green, but it needs to kind of be a mid-tone green, and you want to spray this directly from the top of the model, almost like a zenithal. I sucked out all the excess air because I'm using a box for this part since Hulk is so big. Then I take a really bright green. I want to go towards yellow in color because I want to create some really bright, vibrant highlights on the top of this model. Again, I'm spraying from the tops, and I'm basically trying to highlight the tippy tops of each little muscle so that it looks like there is some volume with the light that's hitting this model. Then I'm going to take some green ink and I'm going to spray this back into the shadows on the bottom of the model. So this is almost like a reverse zenithal, if you will. This is going straight into the shadows and over the black that was left there, which was turned to purple, which has now been tinted a little bit green, so it's kind of purpley greenish. Now I'm slowly going to work my way up in brightness, and this is going to be done by using yellow mixed into the green. I'm slowly but surely going to add a bit more yellow as I work my way up. I'm going to create these highlights specifically around the forehead and the shoulder areas, and some a little bit around the hands. This is going to create what you would call the focus area. Next, I'm going to paint this with a protective matte layer, which is not going to be matte because for some reason it just turns out to be satin. I don't know why, but it's fine. It's just to protect the layers underneath. Now I'm going to work on the base, and as usual I've printed out a nice piece of sticker to go on the bottom. It's not sticker, it's just paper, and I'm going to stick that on using 5-minute epoxy. I used my hairdryer to warm the epoxy, which will do two things. It'll make it run a little bit easier as well as cure a little bit faster, because epoxy is exothermic, meaning you've already sped up the heating up action of its actions that it's trying to do as a scientific thing. You know what I mean? Anyway, I'm gonna then just go back to the base and I'm gonna paint up any areas of black that kind of got painted over when I was doing that little sticker underneath. I'm then also gonna dry brush in varying levels of silver, starting with the dark silver and working my way up to a really bright silver. Now I'm gonna work on the rock, and I need to now create a rock that I'm gonna be able to duplicate throughout doing this process with all the characters. I want the rocks to look similar, but not exactly the same. So I'm gonna use a method that I used in a lot of my videos, just because I know this method and I know it works really well. I'm gonna leave you with the visuals of this, and you can enjoy the beautiful music that I have chosen to overlay on this section of the video. Now it's time for the pants, and I'm going to make a mix of old rust, which is a brown color. It's reddish brown in tone, but I'm going to use this plus a dusty sort of khaki color, and I'm going to mix the two together to create the brown of his pants. I want to start out with the medium tone, and I'm going to paint this over everything, and I'm going to wet brush some of the lighter dust color over the top of that, just in the highlighted areas, to kind of wet blend the area a bit. Then I'm going to paint Cygor brown around his belt. And then I'm going to take Agrax Earthshade and I'm going to spray that from the bottom of the model. This is going to create the shadows on the pants itself. Now to tint the base just a little bit, because I don't want it to be just rock color on its own, I'm going to add a little bit of a greenish blue hue to it, just so that we get a bit more excitement in the rock and it's not just grey and boring. I'm going to use that same greenish blue hue that I used to paint the rock, and I'm going to use that to paint his fingernails. This may take 1 or 2 layers. In my case, I think it was around 2 layers, but making sure that I went over the edges of the nails as well as over the top and keeping it flat. I also painted this over the eyebrows, but this is just a preliminary step because I'm going to come back and paint them later. I used that color to paint the lips as well. This, I'm not going to paint too thick. I'm just going to use it as a tint to change the hue of the lip to be a little bit darker, so it's not the exact same color green all around. Now for his hair, I'm going to mix a little bit of green into the black. It's not going to be noticeable now, but just the fact that I've mixed it in means that this is no longer black black, it's now green black. So we will now henceforth refer to it as green black. And I then painted the green black all over his hair. This is just a solid base coat, and this is just the start of what the hair will be later. I also used this same green black to paint over his eyebrows. This you want to be careful with. You don't want to just paint caterpillars. Try to paint this in brush strokes. You want to try and follow the strokes that are on the sculpt itself. There is usually a couple of hairs sculpted into the sculpts. If not, just try to make up a couple of brush strokes. It will look better in the end than if you just did caterpillars. For his eyes, I painted the usual black first, and then I made a reddish pinkish mix to paint on the lower part of the lid, just to create a bit more bloodish kind of look to the eyes, so they weren't just stark and too flat and boring. And then I added white, which is actually an off-white. It's not really white, stop shouting at me. And I painted that through the whole entire whites of his eyes. I'm not gonna lie, Hulk has a massive face, but his eyes are tiny because he scrunches his face up and has a very deep brow. So it is really difficult to get into these small spaces. I then painted a dark pink onto the inside of the mouth and around the gums along the top row of his teeth. I also painted a little bit on the bottom row, but not too much, and careful not to go over the lips. I then used that to base coat the tongue, and I incrementally added white to it to increase the pinkishness of the color, and I dippled that all over his tongue. That is a technical term for stippling that I've just made up right now. For the eyes, I used the dark green and I mixed white into that dark green. Of course, you could go yellow with this, but the white gives a little bit something to it just because everything else has been increased the brightness by using yellow. I'm using white, so it's desaturated. It kind of stands out from the yellow and doesn't look like just highlighted skin in his eyeballs. I then used the same white and I watered that down so it was quite thin, and I painted that over each teeth. The thing you want to do with teeth is not to paint a solid stripe over the whole lot of the tooth. You want to paint each tooth individually and slowly but surely work your way around the edges until the gap is very, very minimal, but it's not massive. Now, there is green left over from the original paint, which is okay because your eye won't see this. I'm making the gap super small between each tooth, so you don't actually notice that, and it makes the teeth look more believable. After I was done throwing my camera around like a complete mad person, I then dry brushed his hair, and this kind of isn't really dry brushing, but in a way it is. It's the same method as dry brushing, but it's a loaded brush, so it's not too fully loaded, but it's paint. There's wet paint on the brush, and I'm smacking it across his head. Just smack those little hairs, and it will look fine. I promise you it will look fine. Smack more on the top than on the sides, a little bit on the little back, just to get the highlight right, and you're good to go. I then used gloss shiny clear coat over everything on the inside of his mouth and his eyeballs, and this makes it look wet and slimy and more realistic, and that's where I called this model Done. Hopefully you managed to take something out of this video that will help you paint a Hulk in the future, even if it's this one or a different one. And even if it's not Hulk, maybe you're painting a green apple and this video helps you paint a green apple. I would like to say, if you enjoy these videos and you'd like to see more in the future, perhaps you want to consider subscribing to the Patreon. The Patreon helps me keep the lights blind in my eyeballs so I can make more videos for you to watch. And speaking of the Patreon, I would like to say a super special thank you to the latest patrons we got over the last couple of weeks. Jay Barton, Anthony Nibs, Jeremy Merrick, and Curtis Joseph. Thank you, my dudes. Because of your assistance over on the Patreon, I can keep these lights bound in my eyeballs as well as make more videos for you to watch. And now we're at the best part of every video, and this is the end of the video. This is where I get to tell you with a smile on my face that if you didn't like what you saw in this video or any of the other videos, then I would like to ask you to please fuck off. Now I'm gonna go paint a girlfriend for the Hulk.